Hello, my name is Francesca Finelli, and I am the Associate Director of Graduate Career Development at GSAS Compass. Today, we will be talking about interview basics, part of the Job Search 360 series. Today's presentation is really a very broad overview of the process of interviewing. If you have questions about your specific interview or would like to schedule a mock interview with a GSAS Compass staff member, please log into our portal to make a career advising appointment. But hopefully at the end of today's presentation, you will be able to walk away with a few key skills, which is learning learning tips on how to successfully conduct a video interview. More and more interviews are being done virtually, and I think it will stay that way for the foreseeable future because it's just much more convenient. People don't have to travel. Then I'd like you to learn how to prepare for some very common interview questions, as well as master that thank you note that you send after you have your interview. Do note that the focus of this presentation is jobs beyond academia. However, a lot of the tips and tools that I'm going to talk about today apply to academic positions as well. So first, I just wanted to go over the interview process, which, as our slide says, is highly variable and usually is multiple steps. So one example, or maybe a common example of an interview process is, and most interview processes start this way is with a quick screening, which is usually, it can be on the phone or it can be via video chat, it can be live or even pre-recorded. Something that we see more and more often is companies asking participants to respond to an automated interview system. So an image will be, or a question will be flashed on the screen in front of you, and then you have a few minutes to prepare an answer, which is then recorded. The hiring manager views this at their own convenience, and past that screening process, you'll often be invited to maybe that second round interview, which is with perhaps a hiring manager. So these are longer interviews, maybe up to an hour, and they usually get to much more in-depth questions than perhaps that screener interview, which was only 20 to 30 minutes. Often you'll get to behavioral interview questions in this round. And sometimes even the salary will be discussed. And then finally, in this third round, this can be up to more than an hour. Sometimes you meet with multiple people. This might involve a group interview or a presentation that you give. Again, as I said, this process is highly variable. I've heard of candidates interviewing 4 to 5 times for a certain position. I've also heard of candidates needing to do a type of project. So maybe they'll do a screener interview followed by a test of your skills, and then, or maybe computer skills, your coding skills, perhaps a writing prompt, and then you'll get to an interview with a hiring manager, and then after that with a group interview. As I said, this process is highly variable. So do keep that in mind, but usually there are multiple rounds that always start with some kind of screener. So as you prepare for an interview, the first thing that you want to do is really have a moment of self-reflection. So think about your skills, your personal qualities, academic, volunteer experiences, and how do these experiences relate to the position and make you a good candidate? From there, you think about really narratives that you share. Successful interviewing is storytelling. And so you can use a resume to review all of your great experience and skills, and then think of a few stories that you want to tell to an employer to really prove to them your qualifications. So take that moment before you go into an interview to really reflect. Look at the job description. Look at the skills, the requirements, what they're asking for in candidates. And then think about your own skills and experiences. And then think about stories that you can tell to prove that you have these skills that the employer is looking for. We'll get to that more later in our presentation when we go to STAR stories and behavioral interview questions. But as with all career work, it really starts with self-reflection. Some good questions to ask the employer before an interview. So ask who will be interviewing you. That way you can get names, maybe even titles of people, so that you can address them by their first name when you meet them. This is a really nice tactic to just forge a connection immediately. Again, interviewing is about showing yourself, your personality, how you connect with others, how you might function in their environment, seeing if you have a good cultural fit. And it is really facilitating connection between yourself and others. And so how do you do that? Calling someone by their first name is a great way to facilitate that connection right away. Then also ask them, what technology do they plan to use? Because there are so many different options now, from Zoom, Skype, Microsoft Teams, maybe even FaceTime. And so make sure that you download these platforms in advance so that you're not scrambling the day of the interview to get this system up and running on your computer, and then you get into the interview and you're all flustered. That's not something you necessarily want, right? So ask in advance not only who you'll be meeting with, but what technology they'll be using, or if it's in person. So if you're meeting in person, maybe ask them for directions to the office. But these are good questions so that you can be most prepared for your interview. Something also to consider, as I mentioned, talking about technology, is body language on camera. So this is something that's a little tricky, and that's why we wanted to devote some time to this in a presentation. So the first thing is that, again, as I mentioned, interviewing is about facilitating connection with those interviewers. And how do we do that? We have eye contact with someone. At least in the United States, by making eye contact with someone, you're really facilitating that connection. It shows confidence, and it is, really a common courtesy to make sure that you're looking at someone in the eye, really giving them your full attention. So instead of looking someone in the eyes when you're doing a video interview, you should be looking at the camera. This is what I'm doing right now. It feels a little uncomfortable because you're used to maybe looking at the screen, wanting to see the person's face. But when you're looking at the camera, that really mimics eye contact. Versus right now, I'm maybe looking at the screen, which looks a little bit less like eye contact. So directing your gaze to your camera is the best way to mimic eye contact. When we do our peer-to-peer mock interview sessions, that's when groups of students get together, practice interview questions. A few students who participated in that program said to help them make eye contact with the camera, they put like a picture of their cat or a loved one near their camera so that it looks like they're talking to someone that they know, and it makes them feel more comfortable. And I love that idea. So I also wanted to share it with you. Another thing to do is really keep your mood upbeat and convey optimism. People like others who are optimistic and cheerful. And so the way that you can convey an upbeat mood is to either sit in your chair with your back straight, your shoulders open, your feet should be planted on the floor, your arms should be resting in your lap or on your desk. You don't want to have your arms covered, kind of showing closed off body behavior. You want your body to be open. Right now I'm standing because that's the best way for me to kind of convey optimism, to be upbeat, and to show open body language. So if you like to also stand, maybe figure that out, put your computer on a couple of books, practice, see what it looks like, what does your background look like, all of that. So do give it a try, but I know that I'm someone who's very bubbly and upbeat. You don't have to be quite as upbeat as I am, just often smiling, using modulation and tone of voice can all show a really upbeat manner. Also, when you're listening to someone, nod and smile. These are attentive listening behaviors to show the other person that we are listening, because we all want colleagues who listen to us. And so just show them again that you're giving them their full attention. So when you're listening to someone speaking, that's okay. You can kind of look down at the screen again, look at their face, but then when you're talking, kind of again, direct your eyes back up to that camera. You can use hand gestures when it feels appropriate. Again, I'm someone who likes to use hand gestures a lot. And so hand gestures, I think sometimes in interviews, I actually have to make sure that my hands are held together or something, so I'm not going overboard with the gestures, because I think you can sometimes do that. But I do think that for emphasis, you can use hand gestures, which also kind of, again, conveys being upbeat. And then try to avoid fidgeting or letting your gaze drift away from the device. So fidgeting, meaning like maybe if you are touching your face or your hair or anything like that, particularly on camera, or if you're in an in-person interview, again, as I said, I kind of keep my hands in my lap or on the desk so that I'm not distracting the viewer with anything that I'm, physically doing. Also drifting away from the device. So sometimes when I think, I do look away, I might look up, that's okay, but I always direct my gaze back to the camera. You should try to also do the same. Again, it's all about facilitating that connection. So looking away or down for a moment is all right, but always try to bring your gaze back to the camera. And then finally, try not to ramble or go on and on and on. Silence is absolutely acceptable. And so we'll discuss a couple of ways to show or to let the interviewer know that you're kind of done answering your question. And I think that the tell me about yourself question is often the one that people kind of have this really awkward pause afterwards. So we'll discuss how to avoid that awkward pause. But again, silence is absolutely acceptable. Don't feel like you need to be talking and filling all the space during an interview. All right, so now we're getting to the point about common interview questions. As I mentioned, the most common interview question is, tell me about yourself. This might be phrased in so many different ways, like tell me about your resume, or tell me about your background, or something like that. But either way, it's usually this introduction of you and your skills. So this is also called your elevator pitch, which is a concise introduction to you, your experience, and your skills. And so should really be, as I said, the purpose is to make an introduction and an impression, should be very brief, about a minute or so, and then organized, informative, and succinct. So who are you and what have you accomplished? Now, if you go to about a minute or so, I still think that's okay, but you want to definitely keep it under 3 minutes at most. You don't want to start off your interview with a very long-winded story about you. You want to keep it really focused. And I think that sometimes people think that they have to tell their whole story. And you don't need to start with, I grew up in Connecticut with my parents and and I learned how to use blocks, and that's why I want to be an architect. I don't think you have to go all the way back. So here's a structure for you to answer this question that's really concise and to the point. So here's this elevator pitch, and usually it starts with, hello, my name is, or if you're in an interview, you don't necessarily need to start with the hello, but I am a graduate student or a recent graduate from something department at GSAS. And then you kind of bring in highlights from your experience. So another format or framework that I've heard that I think is really effective is thinking about, you start with the present, you go to the past, and then you end with the future. So a quick introduction that you could do is, hello, my name is Francesca. I'm Associate Director of Graduate Career Development at the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. My background is in counseling psychology, as well as my undergraduate degree is in art history. And currently, I'm looking forward to working at your organization as a career counselor because I have a real interest in helping people develop in their career paths. So this is, that was incredibly short. You'd probably want to go a little bit farther and maybe highlight past experiences that relate specifically to the job. But as you could see, I started with the present. What am I currently doing? I went to my past, focusing mostly on my educational background, but you could also highlight maybe volunteer opportunities you have, internships, work experiences, and then going to the future of saying what skills you have or what are you excited about this role. And that's a nice way to avoid that awkward silence that I mentioned. So bringing it back to the job, why you're qualified, why you're excited about the role is a good way to kind of have a natural segue into the rest of the conversation for an interview. Another very common question during an interview is, why are you interested in working for this company and in this role? So they ask this question because employers want someone who is excited about working with them as well. So if, one thing to consider is that you should really, when answering this question, is be enthusiastic and authentic. Don't embellish or maybe lie about why you want to work for a company. And if you find yourself embellishing or feeling like you need to come up with something and you can't think of something off the top of your head, that's probably a red flag. And maybe you want to consider not, maybe after that interview, if, you're eventually offered the job at some point, maybe really consider if this is something you actually really want to do, because if you can't think of a reason why, then maybe you shouldn't be working at that company. Another thing to do is really do your research. So so you've done some self-reflection. So before an interview, make sure that you research the company. Go to their website, check out their social media pages, learn about the company culture, the mission, and then try to align your own skills and interests with that of what the company is doing. So try to, again, be authentic in the reasons why, but make sure you're doing your research and you can cite a few very specific examples about why you're interested in working for the company. For example, I heard a student say, they were interviewing for a consulting company. They asked them, why are they excited to work there? And they actually cited some specific cases that consulting company had published on their website that student had actually thought was really interesting. So they said, this one case that you did about, reconsidering food and how we're using food in our communities. I don't know, just coming up with something off the top of my head here, but they cited a very specific case that this company had done. And that was a really very detailed and nuanced answer that shows that they did some really great research. And then try to connect this work to your career trajectory and show how this position might make sense with your career. So for example, I'm really interested in switching to finance for a while and have been actively managing my own personal portfolio for a few years. Joining a quant shop makes sense to me because I think it's one of the few places where I'll be able to use my technical skills and spend my days thinking about finance. I'm really excited to learn more and see how I'll be able to contribute to the firm. Now, I was just reading that response. That's the response I found kind of on the internet. But I think that speaks well as to why you're excited about the role, how you see this as part of your career trajectory. I know some people are not sure about their career trajectory. So if you can't name this reason, that's okay. I wouldn't say that's a huge red flag. This is a nice bonus if you can do it. But if you don't necessarily can't connect this to your career trajectory, make sure that you're citing some very specific reasons as to why you want to work with that company, and also maybe have that specific role within that organization. So next, the most common interview question type are behavioral interview questions. In this short video, we do not have time to get to technical interview questions, case consulting questions, brain teasers, any other group interviews because it's so broad. What we do recommend is at the end of this video, you'll see some resources to assist you with different interview types, as well as for specifically like technical interviews, talk to your department, try to find alumni who are versed in this technical interview. GSAS Compass staff, we're generalists. We're not able to give you very specific information about technical interviewing styles. I personally don't know how to code, so I won't be able to assist you with that. So you do have to use different resources to help you prepare for these types of interviews. What GSAS Compass staff is versed in is common interview questions such as behavioral interview questions. And these behavioral interview questions you will find in every type of interview. Doesn't matter the industry, you will always be asked these types of questions. So what are they? They focus on a candidate's past experiences by asking them to provide specific examples of how they've demonstrated certain behaviors, knowledge, skills, and abilities. So the past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. So that's why employers like to ask you about your past experiences to have an understanding of how you'll function in their work environment. And these can be really probing, very specific, and they can ask you questions about things that might make you feel uncomfortable, such as the time when you failed. And we'll get into that a little bit later in this presentation, but the reason why they're asking you these questions is because you'll most likely fail at something on your job. I know that it's a good day when I've only made one mistake that day. We all make mistakes every day. We are not robots. So the employer wants to see how can you deal with those mistakes and those mishaps that you experience maybe on the job and overcome them. So the answers to your behavioral questions should really be concrete evidence to show how you've dealt with issues in the past. So you want to be as specific as possible with your responses. And it should really reveal a level of experience and your potential to handle similar situations. So as I mentioned, times that you've had to deal with a difficult colleague or times that you had to manage a project. These are all things that you'll probably have to do within your role, and they want to see how you've done that in the past. And if you don't have specific experience with maybe managing someone, I know that's something that you often do as you move higher up in your career. What you could say is, I don't necessarily have experience with managing an individual, but I can say, during my experience as a TA and working with a class, this is kind of how I managed class expectations. Or so you could come up with a similar or adjacent experience that you've had, or let's say they're asking a question about a time that you had to represent a company at a conference and you haven't done that before. You could say, well, if this is what I might do in that situation, and then come up with a hypothetical situation. So the best way to answer behavioral questions is to use the STAR method, which again allows you to get really specific in your responses because you really want to prove those skills and experiences to that employer. So you start first with the S, the situation, or the problem or conflict that you were facing. So give them some context. Next, move on to the tasks. What tasks did you identify in response to this situation? Then what were the actions that you actually took to follow through? And then finally, what was the result? How did it benefit the organization? And can this be quantified? And if not, how can it be qualified? Or just what was the outcome of this situation? So use this framework to help you answer a variety of behavioral interview questions. Interviewing is so difficult because you never know what questions you'll be asked. You know, though, that you'll be asked, tell me about yourself and why do you want to work with this company and organization? So those are two that you will be asked, so prepare for those. But the other questions, you have really no idea. So to help you prepare, I always suggest creating somewhere between 6 to maybe 10 STAR stories that you can tell in response to varying interview questions. So typically what I'll do is I'll start with the job description. question and I'll look at those key skills and qualifications. Maybe a key skill is communication skills. Maybe another key quality is project management. Maybe another key skill is, interpersonal skills. So I might think of experiences when I've proven these skills, and certain experiences can maybe work for different types of interview questions. So maybe I tell a story about organizing a spring career fair that we had last year and we'll be having again this coming spring with multiple graduate schools. And that experience, that story that I tell could probably work for communication skills, could work for project management, could work for interpersonal skills. So I might draw upon one experience to answer multiple types of questions. So if you have, 7 star stories in your pocket to tell that can be used to answer many different types of questions, you'll be more prepared. So these behavioral questions often start with, tell me about a time when. It's open-ended questions. So you had to step up to be a leader or worked with someone outside of your team. You could read through this list. But one that I think is often asked and something that students really struggle with is, tell me about a time you had to accomplish something but failed. So again, you will fail in the workplace. It's okay. We all do it. I've had my own set of failures. So again, they just want to see, how did you go about dealing with this failure in the workplace? So, and how you dealt with difficulty. So use a specific example, right? Behavioral interview questions should be very specific. That's often the feedback that I most often give to students during a mock interview, is that your answer was not specific enough. You were too broad in your answer. So here's a suggested format. The last time I tried to accomplish something but failed was X. So you explain the situation, right? I tried to do Y. And then so I talk about the tasks and the actions that I took, but found that Z made the task difficult to complete. I tried A and B, and then discussed the problem with my colleague who suggested C, but that failed as well. I then discussed the problem with my supervisor who suggested a few other approaches which we tried together. All of their suggestions failed. So we decided to move on to the next task. So those were, as I mentioned, tasks and actions. And then this is the result. The information I learned from this process allowed me to succeed the next time I tried to complete X. So again, you're showing that you worked with others, that you didn't try to just solve the problem alone. You tried colleagues and then your manager. So you kind of went multiple avenues to try to overcome this issue that you were facing. And that's what employers want. Someone who's not just going to go, oh, I give up, and not talk to anybody about it and not tell anyone that you're having trouble. The point is to show that you've tried to collaborate with others, get others' input to really overcome this issue. And sometimes things still fail. And so at the end of this, what did you learn? That's usually the result. What did you learn from this failure? Because every time we fail, we learn something new. So let's say now you had an excellent interview, you're feeling really good, or maybe you had an interview and you were like, I had no idea how that went. Either way, you need to write a thank you note afterwards. And so the purpose of the thank you note is to really, just tell the interviewer that you enjoyed meeting them. And it should be sent at least 24 hours after your interview. I like to wait at least a couple of hours before I send that thank you interview. I have received a thank you interview right immediately after the interview. And it kind of made me think, did that person even really reflect on our conversation that we had? So you do want to spend some time reflecting and then drafting that thank you letter. So it should be clear and concise. In a moment, I'll show you a sample. It should express gratitude for the opportunity to interview with them. It should mention specific aspects of the interview that were interesting to you, or what did you learn? As I mentioned, that thank you that I got right after the interview, I was like, I don't know if they really even thought about this. So do reflect on it. And then ask any clarifying questions that you may have, and you might even think after the interview, oh my gosh, I didn't mention my thesis and how I spent so much time working on this thesis research, and a large part of the role is research. then you might want to mention that in a thank you note. Hopefully you mention that in the interview though as well. So if you do miss something though, say you miss something, you can add it in that thank you note. So here's a sample. And so you want to make sure that you have like a subject that's easy to identify. Thank you for the interview. I want to thank you for interviewing me yesterday for the position of research scientist. I enjoyed learning about the needs of your department and the future of the company. With my background in research labs at Columbia, and as president of the student group of women in science at Columbia, I believe my skills and experiences have prepared me for this role. So a statement of confidence. Why are you qualified? I'm specifically interested in the professional development opportunities that this position's offer. So maybe that's something that, again, is not readily not listed in the job description, that there's these professional development opportunities. That's probably something that you'll learn in an interview, such as the annual conferences that employees are encouraged to attend. Thank you again for the opportunity to discuss my candidacy, and I look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely, and then you provide your contact information. So this is a great way to just, show the employer that you're really interested, and it's just common courtesy. So this comes to the conclusion of our video. As I said, it is a very quick overview of interviewing. There's so much more that we could get into the specifics, but we wanted to make sure to keep these videos pretty short. So if you have more questions, take a look at the additional resources at the bottom of this page after this video, as well as make sure to schedule a one-on-one advising appointment to ask a career advisor questions about your specific upcoming interview. I hope that this video has been instructional, and good luck on your upcoming interview.